Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Chris and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rebel. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. Don't forget there is a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information and updates about us in the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host, Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms.
Welcome. This is the first time we've done, I would say, a proper book talk book in a hot minute.
I don't know if that's true. You just did whatever.
Which one?
I don't know. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. That was like in September
Is
or
that it?
August.
I wouldn't consider that a book talk book, but also I
Why
don't
would
have
you
that on
not?
that side. I've never seen it really on my side. I think I've seen it like a couple of times, but
I mean, it has over 1 million reviews, so it's got to be on Book Talk somewhere.
I guess. I don't know.
I don't
But
know
you know,
what
like
else we've
the
done.
book talk romance, like people like this has a cult following. It's not just like in recommendations. Like I feel like the Dowry of
Bunny, we
Blood
just did
Girls
Bunny, bro.
and
Go
Bunny.
get out
Okay,
of here. Get out of here with your made
that
up.
feels ages ago. I don't know. Probably because I read so much, so it's like it's
we
gone with the
that's like
wind.
because it's literally the episode before we just did was the horror, and then before that we did Bunny, so it was not
It
that long
was
ago in
okay.
the
So it
grand
wasn't. I
scheme
don't know why it feels forever ago. Anyways,
of the
I don't know. This
podcast.
one just feels a little bit different.
Well, because you like this more than you like Bunny.
Significantly more than I like Bunny.
I mean, we can go into it more whenever we get into spoilers, but I was kind of expecting more. Like, I feel like it's more like almost like erotica, like romantic erotica, rather than it is like vampire gory horror.
See that. So, for those that don't know what this book is about, it is essentially a retelling of Dracula, but it's told from the perspective of his first wife, Constanta. Neither of us are going to be able to pronounce this
No,
correctly.
I was saying
Constanta.
I think it
I
is
want to say
Constanta.
Constantinople. I don't know why.
I
That's
kept
just
wanting to
like
say Constanata.
this is going to be a difficult one, but that's
Yeah.
like essentially what this is. It's I would not call it a sapphic. It is a queer novel
Mhm.
in itself, and it explores some really heavy topics. So if you haven't read this and you're considering going into it, keep that in mind. It is also second person limited. So that is also another thing. I did not know that before going into it. I went into this
I
pretty
didn't either.
blind. I knew it was a vampire book and we were saving it for the fall
Halloween.
season.
Yeah.
So we went into it pretty blind. It's a very popular book though, because if you go on TikTok, you type in A Dowry of Blood, it's got a cult following. People love this book.
It only
And it's
has it only
I know
has
it only has
70K reviews
70,000 reviews.
on Goodreads specifically, which is
Mhm.
I thought it would have been more. Like I thought it would at least pass like the 100K mark.
Yeah, so it's sitting at a point I can imagine it end up like getting more traction eventually because it's only been out since like 2019. So I guess this is like the 5th year it's been out.
Yeah, it's been out for a while
So
then.
I don't know how many sales it actually
2022
has because not everyone uses Goodreads or
came
Storygraph.
out in
But I
2022.
mean, it's not bad. 3.99 stars on average. So almost like 4.0.
Oh, I was just saying we could talk about like what our knowledge is of Dracula outside of this novel too as well because obviously Dracula is like a very big novel, literary in the literary sense. But I've never read it.
I haven't read it either. We decided that next year we're going to end up doing the daily Dracula because it starts in like May and it goes all the way up to like Halloween because the book is written in a letter format, which I think is a really unique style of writing for like the time that it was written in. It's a very influential novel. Like Dracula has inspired so
Hmm.
many movies and I would even say like relationship tropes that we like see in like these vampire like the dynamics. Um, so it whatever his name is, Bram Stoker
Mhm.
walked so Twilight could run, so to speak.
Well, cause like, I've never read Dracula, but I saw the play whenever I was in, like, high school, maybe? Like, I saw, like, a stage adaptation of it. So, like, that's, like, so I kinda have, like, basic knowledge. I mean, it's, like, basically, like, the same thing as, like, if you watch the movie or whatever, which I'm sure there's, like, one, like,
Mhm.
Dracula movie that's, like, following the main plot points of the book. But it's also been years since I've seen it, so it's not like I remember that much. But to be honest, I was not like, in Dracula, like, the play, it doesn't really talk about his brides in it, I don't feel
Doesn't talk
like.
about Mina because I know there's
No,
like
cause like, they all have different names. I was doing some research about it. Cause like, depending it's like a trope for Dracula's wives. It's not, like, necessarily, like, an actual, like, canon of Dracula
mhm.
because there's, like I was doing some I was, like by research, I was reading the Wikipedia page, but, like, people kinda make their own brides and their own, like, lore with it. It's not like there's set 3, like, women,
I think it
typically.
makes sense because Karina Hallie's Blood Orange is a retelling of Dracula, but it's in that case it's Mina, but she gets like reincarnated over and over again, and he's constantly losing her, and it's very popular. I like that was the my introduction to Karina Hallie as like an author, and so I can like definitely see that, and it seems like every retelling of Dracula is not what the main story is, so I don't actually know what the main story is, and next year probably should have planned this better because I didn't know this was a
Yeah.
Dracula. I just thought it was a vampire story, to be honest. And this is kind of like the shitty thing when we go into these books super blind and we don't research it is we don't really
Yeah.
know all of it. And next time we will be better prepared because I think maybe next year we'll do like Carmilla too.
The An Education in Malice
Well,
is
yeah, but
S.T.
we'll
Gibson's
probably have
retelling of that. So we
the
could probably
Car
do Carmilla
read the
and then
original.
yeah.
Yeah, that way we get
Um,
source material.
well, because I'm pretty sure the Dracula book follows Van Helsing's
Hmm.
perspective, which is spoilers for Dracula, I guess. That's who kills Dracula at the end of the Dracula book. So that's one thing that I think, which I think is that's like it's more like focusing, I guess, on the human element of Dracula rather than it's the vampire element, which I guess this more focuses on. And yeah, I mean, we just don't have a very strong background in Dracula, which I don't necessarily think you need to have one for this because it kind of seems like it goes on its own way, anyways.
Like the no spoilers review, it kind of reminds me lyrically and whimsically like um this is how you lose the time war, like that poetic nature of it. However, I do think the storyline is a bit more flushed out and concise where I felt very lost reading that book. This one at least I knew what was happening. And I
Mhm.
overwhelmingly enjoyed the experience and like how it was explored. It was slower at times, but I think from like the historical standpoint too, I thought it was really interesting to see like the different time periods they went through. And there's one specific time period that I do think that we are going to dwell a little bit on, which is the USSR, early
Mhm.
revolutions. But yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting book. I do think you could get value out of reading it just so you understand like why people are talking about it. And from what I read in the reviews of it is people either really loved it or they felt duped, they lied to, that it was just like talked up too much. So I think it's just it depends on what you like in a book. Not everyone's gonna like this.
That's kind of like my thing because I was kind of expecting more like plot because I know like Mariah, she can get behind a book that's just vibes. Not me personally, I want a little bit more substance, a little bit more going on. And this is like a book that is like basically it's strictly following like an abusive relationship entirely. Like that is what this book is. And if that's what you're interested in reading, then I can see you really enjoying that. But I don't read that much one romance in general. If I do read romance, it's usually subplot, subplot. Like it's like very minuscule, and if I do read a lot of romance, I'd say I typically don't end up enjoying it very much if I am. So I think
Yeah.
that's, like, kinda depends on what you're interested in. If you're interested in romance, which Mariah does read a lot of romance books, I can see that's why you ended up enjoying it more than I did personally.
A lot of run-of-the-mill, like, romance novels or, like, about vampires, it kind of there's, like, the age dynamic, and it's kind of brushed over it, which we're gonna get into the spoilers. So if you haven't read it, this is probably gonna be the time where you wanna, like,
We didn't talk about
pause
S.T. Gibson
pause
at all.
video or pause the episode and check out. But I do feel like a lot of vampire novels and even, like, fae stuff, like, where there's those really big age dynamics, they don't seem as exploitative as this, where it seemed very real, like somebody that's lived for hundreds and hundreds of years who's slowly losing like their humanity and their kind of like disdain for like people who just live like normal lifespans. I thought Dracula's motivations and whatnot made a lot more sense. And I think it's like a people are disillusioned when they just label this as like a proper romance when it's not.
No, because I mean, you're following a very I mean, no offense to, like, Const Con Constant Constanta however you say her name, Constanta, but, like, her to like, I think she tries to be a good person, but then also it's like whenever you're in a very abusive and toxic relationship, you kind of end up taking those traits as well and pushing them outwards to other people, and so they kind of just all end up there ends up with all 4 of them, it ends up being a very toxic family life and, like, relationship all the way around, not even just with, like, Dracula and Constant Con Con I don't know how to say her name, it makes me so bad.
Constanta, I suppose.
Constanta, and then, like, with how she treats, Magdalena and even, like,
Alexi?
Alexei? I don't know because it's supposed to be more, like, Russian,
That's
but
how okay, in Stranger Things, there was a Russian character. Alexi was how it was said. That's what I'm rolling
okay.
with. Spelt the same to
Okay.
me too.
But so, like, they all end up having, like, these very, like, toxic and abusive relationships with each other, using each other to, like because, like, Alexei and, like, Constant I cannot say it, I really cannot. Constantana I like how Alexei or whatever he ends up calling her, Constance, that's what Imma start calling her too, because he just like me for real. So with their, like, dynamic, it's, like it feels very predatory in so many different ways where I think it's more like the traumas of her relationship with Dracula ends up making her toxic to Magdalena and, um, Alexei too, and so it's a very harmful, like, relationship, and I did not have any fun, like, reading it, to be honest.
Yeah, and it almost reminds me and I haven't read this, so I could be off ba or off base with it, but, like, it ends with us. I know that that's supposed to be
Oh, I've
exploring
read it.
an abusive relationship, so I don't know if this is similar in the vibes, but, like, maybe more apparent with the fact that it's not meant to be, like, romanticized in that way.
I think I don't know, I think It Ends With Us, it sucks. It's not a very good book, and I do think the main love interest of It Ends With Us, he's given, like, the benefit of the doubt. He's kind of like even though he's a terrible person, shitty person, abusive man, he kind of is, like, still viewed as, like, almost like a knight in shining armor, versus this, Dracula is not viewed in that way at all, and it's, like, all the time you're, constant
Connie,
constant
Constance.
constant Constance, whatever, how she reacts to it, you never I feel like she always says, like, "Oh, I loved you so much," but I feel like I never felt her feel that love for him.
Mhm. I can definitely see that, and it kind of reminds me of so, like, Bell Hooks has that book all about love, which I think is a very good book. I think everyone should read it, where it really explores what it means to love another human being, and we can always, like, be kind of confused or confuse love with, like, lustfulness or just other emotions that are powerful very similar, but not actually like, because like love is you want the best like spiritual well-being for another human being. And obviously, if you've gone through this book, Dracula is not doing any of those things for any of their
Yeah.
well-being. It's all for his own self-interest. He's a very selfish individual and he only looks out for himself. Then I think that's why he picks out like these very vulnerable people, because every single one of them is in a precarious situation. The original like Constanta is dying, whereas like Magdalena is in a very politically precarious position, and then Alexei is starving.
Yeah. But I think with like Magdalena specifically, it's almost like she chose it without knowing the full ramifications of what she chose, because I mean, if you see from her perspective. I think one thing that really frustrated me a lot too is the timeline of this book, because you don't really get any dates until like the October Revolution specifically is like the I feel like that's the only like direct date mentioned. I know there's like some stuff about the Ottoman Empire whenever they're in Vienna, but like it's not like a specific year given like it is for whenever they find Alexei. But I think that's very frustrating too, because you never get to really see how long each of these relationships last. Like where it's just Dracula and Constanta, and then like how long it's Magdalena and Constanta and Dracula. You don't get to see how long those relationships are going for, to see like how much, like how toxic it's been, and like how much resentment has been building and things like that. And I feel like it's kind of frustrating in that way.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think that the first relationship, it takes place I think between 4 and 1600 is the years,
Mhm.
because we have like the plague, but it's kind of ambiguous. We don't really know which plague it is that is
I think
happening.
you're assuming it's the Black Death, sort of.
Yeah, because of the
Mm,
symptoms that are surrounding it. So it's doing that all the way up until like 1700s, 1800s, and then you get Magdalena, but then you don't get Alexei until like early 1900s. So there's, I don't know, like
and then
3 or
even
400 years.
after that part, because, like, how long Alexei can't be with him for that long of a time, because, like, whenever he's going, like, spoilers for the end of the book, but, like, whenever he ends up going to New York, he's still only taking a boat. Like, no offense, but it's probably only like, it can only be, like, World War II time, you would think at the latest,
I
you know?
was thinking, but even then, I don't even know
And I'm
if
like,
it's
that's like, he has not put in, like, he's not even experienced, like, the amount of trauma that, like, Magdalena and, uh, Constantana has been experiencing, and it's just, like, the fact that, like, them choosing him, and then, like, he kinda, like, threw a wrench in, like, their entire relationship. Which, I mean, like, obviously, it's a good thing that it happened without them realizing that, but I just think it's interesting. This is why you shouldn't be with men, you know? They ruin everything.
and even then he's like kind of self-aware, because there's so many instances where he's like, love makes a monster out of us all. I'm like, you've been this alive this long, you've researched all of this stuff. I know you're reading philosophy and philosophers, like there's a reason you went to the
Mhm.
USSR. I know there is, but his takeaway is nothing. And I think that was really frustrating, but maybe that was also the point, is like him spending all this time researching, and he's like looking for self-validation, when really he's
Or
like,
maybe
we're
it's
gonna get that.
more of a distraction because he knows, like, whatever, like, he's kind of damned for, like, not necessarily, like, hell if he believes that he's not gonna die, but kind of living a life that is not really a life, where you are constantly, like, the people that surround you are dying, that are like blips in your life and stuff like that. I can imagine it's got to be a very hard life to live, where just watching everyone you ever cared about live and die and not even be remembered anymore, because at the point whenever Constanta and Dracula meet, he's already been alive for hundreds of years before that. hundreds of thousands of years. We don't even know whenever he first became a vampire, you know? So I'm sure he's got his own traumas that he's dealing with. And so that's why he's so like obsessive with his research. Where I think it's probably more of like a distraction for like the mental illness.
I think so too, but also he like slowly, in my opinion, starts to go down like a proto-fascist mindset where he's just like he has such a violent disdain for humanity and their illnesses and how they live in poverty and whatnot, and it's just it seems like he does not like them, and if it was his way he would have like some vampire hierarchy and have some like daybreak type shit where there's just like reforming the society but it's just vampires farming humans because he doesn't treat humans as though they are like autonomous beings.
Well, I wonder if it's just because like well, at least like I don't know about like the lore of like the book, but like in general, like there's like the whole like vampire hunter sort of like esque of people, and people are always very afraid of him because of like the monster that he is. It almost like reminds you of Shrek. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm abstaining.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know what you're saying, but I hate it.
But am I wrong? And that's like, I think, no offense to Shrek, but if he was living for hundreds of thousands of years, basically in isolation and like shunned from like whatever community you could have had, then yeah, I'd probably be pretty fucked up too, you know?
I did not think it was gonna go this direction.
because
Dracula to
I
Shrek pipeline.
Well, because like I think it's a very different like relationship of like these four vampires versus like something like Twilight, where Carlisle and his vampire fairy, they very much love humans. Like they're like obsessed with them. They don't even want to turn people unless it's like a desperation thing, like someone's gonna die and this is like what they want, sort of thing. Most of the time, right?
I mean,
So
like, yeah, like technically, but also like if you think of all the stuff they could probably do for humanity and like all the time they spent researching all this bullshit and they kind of just like recluse into Forks, Washington, which has I'm sure the population is higher now because of like the books and shit. Um just
I
going
mean,
somewhere the fuck
Carlisle's a
anywhere.
doctor. I mean, he's helping his
What's
community.
Esme
What?
doing?
I mean, she's a homemaker, I guess. Oh, is that
What's
not
she
real
need a
work
homemade?
now? What are
They
you
don't do
talking
anything.
about? They're awake 24/7.
But they don't eat like food. They
They
don't
still gotta
use the
clean. They
bathroom.
probably make met. How do you know they don't go to the bathroom?
Canonically, they don't use any of that stuff.
How do you know? Did you ask Edward?
I'm sure it's in the Stephanie Meyer blog post. I'll have to look.
Okay. But I'm sure they still have to like shower and they still clean. And they do eat. They eat animals. They eat their blood.
Out in the woods,
How do you know? Well, they gotta come home and shower off, don't they?
I just hose off.
You would never take a hot shower if you were a vampire.
I don't know if they can feel that. I don't know. This is besides the point. Stephanie Meyer's vampires don't make any fucking sense. At least this, like, they have some sort of like sensory, like they still have like the senses for a time being before they completely
Until
like
they
lose
get
their humanity.
once they're alive for so long.
Yeah. And I think that's partially why like Dracula is always picking up like these new like shiny pretty things is because he gets to like relive humanity through them, like vicariously through them because he can't do
Hmm.
it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main problem with him is just because he becomes so abusive in that way where he wants to shut them all out too, where they don't even get any ability to go outside and experience the outside world, even if they wanted to, just because he knows he would be shunned by the outside world. Because, I mean, you see a lot whenever, like, Magdalena first joins them. They're doing lots they're going to the opera, they're going to the carnival, they're doing things together that are romantic and going out in public and things like that. And so it's just interesting as like the hundreds of years as time moves on, Dracula kind of becomes worse about it because I'm guessing I can only imagine because of like we don't know when Dracula becomes Dracula whenever he becomes a vampire. But I can imagine like seeing like society from the way that it was if it's like peasantry, like, even before that type of, like, era, and then going into, like, the way that society is at the point of, like, I guess, whenever Magdalena and stuff, like, with the monarchies and stuff like that, where you can see that and kind of be frustrated, I guess, with that,
I
because
don't
it's
know if he's, like, frustrated with that or, like, the fact that despite all of his, like, research and whatnot, like, who knows if he's trying to, like, reverse it or something. But, like,
Mhm,
technology is going at such a fast rate, and he can't keep up because now there's, like, surveillance state being implemented. Like, people are being tracked a lot more, like, the immigration and whatnot is a
mhm.
lot more stringent than it was before, so he's having a harder time trying to navigate and, like, swindle funds from people because it's harder to do, and he doesn't wanna adapt for the times.
Which, I mean, who can blame him, for real? We're all one Earth. We're all one Earth. We're all one people. That's what he said. Dracula said, "Destroy all borders."
So real. You're real for that
But
one.
that's what I'm saying, like, obviously, like, I do not, like, it's confusing because, like, it's almost the most realistic version of a thousand-year-old man I've ever seen in, like, any of these, like, fantasy fiction books, because, like, you look at, like, ACOTAR and stuff, like, with the Fae stuff, like, it's they always, like, make these thousand-year-old men act like they're, like, completely normal people and, like, modern men, which
Yeah, like,
it would
Reeson and
never be the
Rowan.
case.
Rowan is, like, the
Yeah,
only one or Lorcan or whatever his name is, like, they actually have, like, some sort of, like, I don't know, they're a little angsty, a
yeah.
little apprehensive, but, like, Rhysand is fine. It's
They're, like,
dandy.
well adjusted to society for, like, modern men, which is, like, if that's what you want and that's how, like, your society is, that's your business, but I don't think it's very realistic because, like, you always, like, see in, like, science fiction and stuff, like, people go back in time and it's always like, "A woman? Ew." You know? So, I think it almost makes more sense. And I feel like Dracula is probably as progressive as he could be for, like, being thousands of years old.
He really is. Like, if you think like, I, like, am breaking them, like, still, like, hung up on that, but if you have, like, the Rhysand, and then I would say that the Darkling is kind of somewhere in the middle, where, like, he still has some grasp on reality, but also he's, like, starting to lose it because he's, like, been around for so long. But then
Mhm.
it would be, like, Dracula, like, on the furthest end of the spectrum of, like, people who've lived for, like, hundreds of years and behave a certain way in society. Like, this is probably the most realistic. Darkling would probably be, like, the closest, like, morally gray version of this.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so confused why people would just call this a romance, because it's like it doesn't read like a romance to me.
It's not
Because
a romance at all because at the end they don't even know a romance book, like, by definition, for a publisher to define their book as a romance, they have to end with a happily ever after is, like, what the trope is called. Like, where even if it's not necessarily, like, forever they're happy, it could be a happy for now, but they have to end with some type of them being together.
like, don't
Like,
get me wrong, I'm happy with the way it went and the way it
yeah.
ended. I'm so happy that there was no like turning point because he was so like beyond saving, but
Mhm.
this is not a romance. So I'm really confused when people like advertise their like sapphic romance. It's like I don't know where you're extracting that from.
I think it's more like not necessarily like a romance, but like do you know like the way that like whenever they describe like gothic romance, sort of like the romantic era within time, like that
Yeah.
sort of like historically, maybe that's what I can see people meaning because I do like get that type of vibe and the way that like you view like it's not a romance, it's like a romantic like sort of
Yeah.
thing maybe if that's what people meant and then it just doesn't come across that way because they don't explain like the historical context of it.
Maybe that's why people are so upset with it too, because it's like it's not a proper romance and they went into it expecting it to be a proper romance. And I've been reading quite a lot of literary fiction, so I picked this up expecting it to be like, oh, a kind of a run-of-the-mill like vampire story. And I was just so pleasantly surprised with how much more like nuanced it was, and it wasn't just like head empty. It actually explored like heavier topics using Dracula. Like I thought this was so fun and different than any like supernatural, like, quote unquote romance I've read.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't like a romance. Like, you don't end up with like rooting for any of these characters really, like, in that way, because they're all kind of like shitty people that are like just in like this toxic foursome with each other. And so they kind of do get like the best case scenario where like the main abuser is dead and then they all kind of split off in their own separate lives to go decide what they want to be, because they never really got that choice for hundreds of years. And so I do think it's a satisfying ending, but I kind of was waiting more for like the shoe to drop. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. In reality, this is kind of just like a vampirical retelling of what's happening with sister wives.
Yeah. Like
I don't
it's
know if you
not
keep up
really.
with that, but like they're
No,
all
but I know
splitting
the
up, but they're
vibe.
still like it's great. It's fantastic.
But I think that's where I was more frustrated with it. Well, because like I don't like romance. I don't want to read only about like people's relationships. I like other stuff going on and then like them also dealing with the relationships. Because even like with whenever I read a few years ago Anastasia, that book is a romance, but is it really a romance where it's no, you don't even end up getting that much romance in it, you know?
Yeah, I thought it was very strange that that one also was advocate or advertised as that when it has a lot more, I would say like political intrigue
Mhm.
and I don't know. Is
But
very different.
that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of the times like if I'm reading a book with romance in it, I don't want it to be the main thing, and that's all this is following is just like the like even though it's not like romantic, it still is a romance, it's a relationship. That's all you end up following is a relationship between these four people. And if that's what you're looking for, that's great for you. Not necessarily what I'm looking for all the time, especially whenever I was expecting more of a spooky book. I was expecting kind of more gory, like vampire, like, cause like, obviously, they do talk about, like, sucking blood and, like, feeding on humans, but I don't think it's very graphic, and there's not a lot of, like, murder,
No, not at
like.
all. I was also hoping it was gonna be a little bit more like gory body horror,
Mhm,
like where you really like get that, but you don't. It kind
mhm.
of is more in the vein of like Interview with a Vampire, that type of like
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah. I
gore, that
100%.
storyline, the vibes of that align a lot more closely with this. It's kind of like
Yeah.
if Interview with a Vampire, but it was like written and said by the authors of it, this is how you lose the time war. Like that is
Mhm.
pretty damn close.
I
Aside
would
from
say
like
I mean,
obviously
I've never read
like
Interview with a
child.
Vampire.
I have well, I've seen the movie many a
I've seen
time.
the movie, yeah, but I mean, like, I think if that's, like, the vibe you're looking for, then you can end up really enjoying this, but, like, that wasn't the vibe I was looking for necessarily with like a vampire book, which like I guess I don't know what I should have expected, because I guess it almost feels like every single vampire book nowadays is like relationship. Like you never get like a vampire just living their life doing vampire things.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because I think the last vampire book that we read together, dare we even call it that, was Bride by Ali Hazelwood.
Oh yeah. And that was also like romance
Yeah.
entirely. But that's kind of like more my frustrations with it, where I guess maybe if I was going in with it knowing it was going to be more of like a critique on like abusive relationships and things like that. Because like I saw obviously at the beginning there's like a whole trigger warnings page. It's like, oh yeah, like this goes into heavy topics of like abuse and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, obviously, like I'm sure Dracula is a very toxic man. Like you're alive for thousands of years, of course. But then I thought it would be more of like surrounding their life and like events that happen within their life, but it's kind of more like anecdotal things that were happening
Yeah, because you're
rather
only
than
getting it
events.
from the main character, like the singular main character. And I know this is something that Kristen is not fond of, is like when there's only one perspective. Um, I do think like
Because there's so much more
artistically it
going
kind of
on.
makes sense why the author did it this way. And I also we read it on the Kindle. So I don't know if the physical copy is made differently because as soon as I finished this, I told Kristen I don't know if it's formatted differently because it almost feels as though there should be like more white space, more like letter oriented, like journal entries. Like it feels like I should be reading a journal, but when you read it like this, so I don't know. Like as it's hard to like talk about this. Like House of Leaves specifically is formatted in a certain way, and it will never be adapted into like a digital version or a movie or an audiobook. You have to only consume it that one specific way. And I feel like this, if it is the way I'm thinking it is, it should only be experienced that way. So it feels a little bit more like you're reading something you're not supposed to, like getting that, like somebody's diary.
I don't know. I mean, I think I didn't really have any issues with the formatting where I was like, I don't. Maybe if there was like dated at the top, that could have made
Too.
it.
That would have been a really good move.
I think that could have been something to make it more like because you're almost getting the way that it's told. It's like after the fact, everything has already happened, rather than it's like her diary entries for like the day, which I feel like if it was more like her writing about the day that happened, then I could be maybe it would have worked better in that way.
Yeah, I can see it. And I think only time will tell with how I end up feeling about it because I have it rated pretty high right now. Will it last with me? I don't know.
Because I feel like I finished this on Saturday or Sunday this week, and I feel like I'm sorry, I have not been thinking about it. Like in out. Like there's nothing like I can't recall like super major plot points or anything. Like obviously like I'm reading other books in between, so that could be why too, but it's not something that's like stuck with me versus like other things that I read where I'm just like I constantly like I'm sitting in bed thinking about them before I go to sleep sort of thing. This is just something that's like, "Oh, it's a book I read."
I can definitely see that. I have it marked as like a 4.75 right now because it's not a perfect five-star book in my opinion. But I can definitely see myself if I ever decided to do a reread or like I really thought about it or read some more vampire books, like it could completely change.
Mhm.
But
I just don't think it's necessarily my style of book, which is why I didn't like it, but I also don't want to hold it against it, which is why I gave it a 3.75 because I do think the writing in it is very lyrical. I like I never like sometimes whenever you read like lyrical books, it can be like how you lose the time where you're like confused. Where I feel like this, you're never really confused. Like everything is clear and to the point where you're understanding what's happening, but I just don't think maybe this is the best medium to tell that story either.
I can
Like,
definitely
in the
see that. I'm
diary entry.
very curious how the author is going to execute the Carmilla retelling because I think that the Carmilla retelling is very interesting. And if it goes the same way that this one did, I think I can see why people would get mad and like rate it, expecting it to be like a froofy little like sapphic story when that's not what
Well,
Carmilla is.
because that's what I kind of thought, like, with this, everyone was like, "Oh, it's like a sapphic love story sort of thing," which I guess, like, there are instances of that, but it's not prevalent enough for me to be like, "Oh, this is a sapphic book." Like, obviously, like, I feel like Constanta's and, Magdalena's relationship is very important, throughout it, and obviously, like, them having each other is kind of, like, what makes them able to do what happens in the end, like, deciding to kill Dracula. I think, like, they needed, like, their strong, like, sisterhood and, like, their bond that they have, but it's, like it's almost, like, minute compared to how much she's, like, obsessing over Dracula
Hmm. I just think
most
it's
of the
better
time.
like they're in either like an open relationship with each other or a polyamory, if you even want to call it that, like a proto polyamory, because I don't think it follows the same principles as like where everyone's consenting to everything.
It is,
You
like,
know,
polyamory, though, more than it is an open relationship, I would say, though, because if it were well, because, like, I know
kind
Dracula
of
says,
forced
like
into it, you know? So that's
yeah, like,
like,
they don't really get a choice, like I mean, they get a choice, but it's, like, again, like, what Constanta says, like, how she never really had a choice, it's, like, Dracula sets up the pieces, so that's the only choice that there is to make, basically, you know?
yeah. So I just think it's really important if people are going to like advertise this in a certain way, maybe avoid those specific labels because I don't think it's honest to
Mhm.
like it feels like I don't know. I can't think of the
It
word.
seems like it's almost, like, harmful or, like, reductive to the book. To make it seem like it's just like, "Oh, it's this beautiful romance, blah, blah, blah," whenever it's a lot more than that, but it's also I don't know. I feel like if it was done differently, I could see myself, like, really raving about this, and for this one, I don't know. It's just, like It didn't have the special sauce.
I can see that. I think either it needed to be longer or have more like character development with the other ones so you feel a little bit more like emotionally connected to them.
Yeah, because I feel like I did not like the only character I really cared about was like Magdalena, and the other ones I was just like, whatever, like they felt like one-dimensional characters. Like they didn't feel very strong, like personality strong, which I guess is like kind of the point of like Constanta is that she kind of just like gets walked over, and that's how like she is. But it's like you're also alive for like hundreds of years. Like grow a backbone at some point.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's like I don't but also we don't know outside of like this retelling of what exactly they were told by Dracula would happen if they tried to leave, like aside from like him saying he would like kill them because they don't know anything about like their existence outside of
But
what
that's
he says.
the thing too is that like these people are like hating their lives, and like no offense, like I know I have mental illness, but like I would just be like, okay, kill me then. Like the fuck? I didn't ask to be here. You made me this way. You know?
Kristen is the worst person to like be empathetic towards these characters. She's just like, all right, I'm done.
Just do it. Like take me out back. Go on. Get it over with. you know? Cuz I'm like, I mean, this is obviously like a me thing, but like I feel like if you're going to like talk about like mental illness and like the way that like abuse like because, like, you see how people are in, like, abusive relationships that are, like, regular human abusive relationships, and those only lasting for, like, a handful of years, like, 10 years, 20 years max, which is, like, nothing in the grand scheme of, like, Dracula's life. And so the fact that, like, you're just getting, like, mentally, like, verbally abused by this man for thousands of years, and it takes you that long for you to stand up and do something, couldn't be me. Could not be me. I would have been out of there a long time ago.
It's strange. I was thinking that while I was reading this as well, because it's like after like a couple hundred years, like you'd think that I don't know.
Like, nothing's gonna change.
But also, I think they're so young when they get taken, they don't have any sort of frame of reference for what a healthy relationship could look like, and also the times. Like, we don't really know exactly
Yeah,
the time or the condition of women was during Constanta's existence. Like, it could have still been maybe feudal, but it also could have been
maybe.
like before that.
That's what I was kinda getting was, like, the before that, because I could see almost, like, feudal during Magdalena's time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very strange. So it's
And
hard to
that's
like
why like, it's so hard to, like, pinpoint dates because, like, at least then if you would know, like, when Dracula became Dracula or some type of then you could have some type of frame of reference. It was very frustrating that way. And then I'm also confused because, like, in the end, all the brides end up killing Dracula. What happened to Van Helsing? How can you just like get rid of that in a retelling of Dracula? I thought that was like a core part of the story.
that I don't know. I guess like it's to give them their power back. I have no idea why that was like chosen to
Because like
be
what
rid of.
at that point, what's the point of making it a Dracula retelling? Can't you just make it any old vampire that you want? Like create your own new vampire?
Like the author never says it's like a Dracula retelling, I don't think, like throughout the
I
book.
think
It's
it
just been like on Goodreads it says that, so I don't know if it was like a later descriptor added.
Well, because it says the darkly seductive tale of Dracula's first bride, which is like this is supposed to be like following Dracula's brides, which I guess I don't know like any other story.
It's also very strange because this wasn't Dracula's first bride, you know? Like I
Yeah,
don't know
like
if it's just like
technically,
technically
because
it's
she was
not. It's
married
just
to a
like
bunch of other people before.
I guess, but also it's like the marriage thing is it was just all very strange.
Because I
But the
never got
vibes
like,
are great. It's written really beautifully. I liked it, but some of the other stuff in it was kind of silly.
yeah,
Especially Lexi being a fucking class traitor. Like you bitch, you don't know what you had and you
yeah,
left it.
you just ran away.
And you can tell it's like the people that like East Germany, they were just like, man, this really sucks. We have 8-hour work days and free childcare, but I really want some luxury items. Like, What? You're treated with respect. Rent is
It's not
5% of your
you know
wage.
why you don't have luxury items? It's not because of communism. It's because they won't trade with you guys because of your government choices.
Mean. It's like they're like, "Oh, the famines," and I was like, "Are you anti-communist?" Like, that was, like, the biggest red flag at the end. I was just like, "Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on." Like, why
Which
are
I
we
mean, like,
talking about this?
and that's like what frustrated me because I like obviously like Alexei is young. Yes, like they like talk about how he's just a boy and stuff like that. So it's like they're all being like incredibly predatory too because they're just like, you know what? This is okay. You know, like Magdalena's cool with it, Constanta's cool with it. Like, if it were me, I'd be like, whoa, 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 we can't find like a 30-year-old guy or something. At least somebody with a prefrontal cortex fully developed.
It's to be honest, they didn't know about that at the time being that this story takes place. So that's the only thing I'll give it credit, but it still is fucking icky. It's
Because like I
maybe it's
feel like
also to like exemplify how shitty Dracula is. He's like, barely an adult. This is fine.
yeah, which I guess, but I mean it's also like I know they don't like know about like prefrontal cortexes, but they're still like I don't know. Like I feel like they're still like socialized because like Constanta directly talked about how it was like a mothering relationship, and I didn't like about like oh my sisters and my brothers, and I did not like the familial terms being used in it all the time. That is like not for me.
Dude, that's what I mean. Like the sister wives stuff. It's just like it's fucking weird.
I know, but that's why I say like they'll be like, oh, like she would be like, oh, I was like his mother. Like, don't say that whenever you're about to have sex with some dude. Like, what? I'm sorry. Like, it would be directly that I was like, hello.
It's like the kid holding the drink with like this side eye, like that. Reading
Like,
it. It's like I
I was
can't.
like, there's a time and a place, and that was not the time nor the place.
It's so funny.
So
Um,
if you're against incest, maybe this book isn't for you. Just saying.
it was
Go like
significantly better than Credence. We have to say that. Like the familiar, like when we
for
talk about that,
incest.
it's not, and it's no the wilds.
I
But
haven't
it
read that
still
one, so
is a little much.
it's still like I understand like they're not related, and like Constanta has been alive for hundreds of years before she meets these people, and like her and Dracula have their own relationship. But then the fact that you're gonna be like, oh, she's like a sister to me, and then we stayed in bed all day together. It's like, okay, like you don't have to say that. You could just say she was like my closest friend. Like I get it then. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we really have any other closing thoughts, unless you want to talk about the USSR more.
No, I'm not gonna do that today. I think it's besides the point, but it does give a really weird vibe. So if you're like a pretty principled Marxist, you know what, I challenge you to read this and just extract what you want at about like the 115 page mark. I want to know what you
That's for
think.
your book. Mine was like 200 something whenever that
I know, I don't
happened.
know why
Mariah
mine was
had a
so much
real
shorter.
weird version on the Kindle.
It was 192, I think, what mine ended
It
up
was
being.
like, I think around like 70% mark, I would say. Once you're at like
Yeah, that must have
70%.
been about if mine was like 192 and I hit it about 116, I think was when they were talking about the Duma.
Because I think my book ended up being, it was like over, it was like almost 300 pages, I think. Which I don't know if that's just because the like the Kindle edition I was reading or what. Yeah, because this is on Goodreads is 250,
Yeah, I don't know
and
why they're
yours
all
was not.
so vastly different, but
Yeah, I don't know.
thanks for listening. The next proper book review we're going to have that's going to wrap up October is going to be Slewfoot by Bram, which is kind of funny. It's like Bram Stoker, Dracula.
But
You
we
didn't
didn't even
plan
read
that.
Dracula.
No, but Bram is the author of that. So if you want to get a head start on reading the next book, that's what we're going to be discussing. And I think it's going to come out on Halloween, or at least very close to
Yeah,
Halloween.
Halloween, the 31st is a Thursday. And we post every Thursday. Right now, we've been posting every Thursday. So If that's all, thank you and good night.